hear from Steve Feilmeier. As you heard from Elizabeth, Steve is the Executive Vice President and CFO of Koch Industries and also an alum of here at Wichita State University. So without further ado, let's welcome Steve to the stage. Steve, thank you for making the trek over here this evening. You were were you in Wichita today, or where were you at?
I was in Atlanta.
Atlanta. Well, before we get started, I want to get a gauge of who's in the audience so you kind of know who you're speaking to. So if you are a student, raise your hand. Student. Got a few students in here, okay? Any faculty, WSU faculty, okay? Any entrepreneurs, startup companies, okay? Anybody who wants to start a business? Anybody got that idea brewing inside of them? There's a few people, silently hand raised. Now, the rest of you here, how many of you are just in the business community? Business leaders in the community? All right. So you gotta have an idea of where we're gonna be at this evening, so you know who you're talking to. But I'm gonna let Jessica kind of kick it off with the questions because she's the newbie on the block, so I'm gonna let her take it.
Thanks for that one. So you talked about how you were just in Atlanta today. I'm sure transition and moving around from place to place is a pretty big part of your life. You mentioned before when you spoke about how you attended 4 different high schools growing up. And could you maybe speak a little bit to how all of that transition, having to adjust to new environments, may have been beneficial and influential in how you've been able to grow as a businessman?
You have a good memory. So my family moved here to Wichita when I was a freshman in high school, and I attended, well, first of all, I attended a Catholic high school in Denver, moved here and went to Bishop Carroll my sophomore year. And then either I got kicked out of Bishop Carroll or something went wrong. But then my junior year, I attended West High School. And then the following year, that's when Northwest opened in 1979, so I ended up at Northwest. And, you know, people say that must have been an awful experience, and I'm sure it was. I don't remember it that way. In fact, that's where I began to learn a lot of bad habits, somewhere around that senior in high school. But really, it probably helped me to learn to be adaptable, you know, and get to know people quickly and try to learn about them quickly. And because when you go to 4 different high schools, you're forced to do that. So I think it was a good thing for me.
So then moving into your time at Wichita State, what are some things that looking back now you maybe wish that you would have known back when you were a student? Either maybe in that time of high school or university.
And I do often say, if I knew then what I know now. You know, I would say probably the most important thing is to not be afraid of, to go through what I went through. I literally had 15 different jobs before this last job, the CFO of the company, and in many different places. And each one of those jobs, you know, introduced me to a new person and a new supervisor. And really, having 15 different supervisors, you know, none of them are perfect, but each of them had good qualities, and each of them had qualities that just wouldn't work for me. I mean, they were bad, it worked for them, but it wouldn't work for me. So being able to have that kind of diversity from a change in job perspective was really positive. But at the time, you know, it felt like a bit of a grind, startup grind. Sure.
There you go.
Okay.
All right, so going through the grind of having 15 different advisors or bosses throughout that time, did any of those become significant mentors for you, or maybe taught you lessons of how you don't want to mentor others as they're going through that same grind of a process?
Well, my biggest mentor, obviously, is Charles Koch. He just has a philosophy about the way he runs his life and the way he runs his business that I admire greatly. And he's gone out of his way the last 25 years, not just to build up a business, but to really teach and mentor, you know, everybody in the company. And he obviously can't do that for 140,000 employees, but he finds a way, directly and indirectly, to do that. And I've been lucky to, you know, be sitting with him for a long time to be able to get that from him.
Very cool. What is maybe the best piece of advice that he has given you, or what's the best piece of advice that you, as a mentor to young entrepreneurs possibly, have you given?
I'd say that the best piece of advice I've ever received, and one that I would offer to the entrepreneurs and the business people in the room, is you just can't predict the future, no matter how smart you think you are and how well advised you think you are. It's, the example that sticks with me is we've spent a lot of money at Koch over the last 13, 14 years, but about 7 or 8 years ago, we were probably 40 billion in on a pretty aggressive investment program. Building new plans and acquiring companies, and we thought it'd be a good idea to go back and revisit the 13 or 14 major projects that we had done to see how they were actually going versus what we thought they were going to do when we did it. And so we prepare the materials, we come in, we sit down, and we say, you know what, we were actually pretty good because we thought we were going to earn a 14% rate of return, and that's about what it's going to be. And Charles looked at the analysis and he said, that is the biggest piece of crap I've ever heard, because the truth is, if you went deal by deal, we weren't even close on the deals, not any of them. Some of them that we thought we're going to, we're always targeting returns somewhere in this range of 12 to 15%, depends on what the risk is, and we didn't hit that range on any of them. Some of them were 5, some of them were 0, some were slightly negative, and some were exceeding way to the upside. And so when you looked at that, the weighted average of it came back to be 14% because lucky. So that really, it caused us to rethink how we do all of our analysis and quit trying to predict the future. When you show a return on something, it's almost laughable. We'll get a document that says 14.63%. And I say, well, you guys are pretty good. You get that accurate. And the reality is the return is going to be somewhere between 12 and 18, maybe. So really, what are the key drivers? Why does the world need this capacity or this investment? What kind of problems are we going to solve? Do we really have competitive advantage, sustainable? And we know things are going to go wrong, so what are the scenarios that could cause it to go wrong? And what are our contingency plans? We're actually thinking about risk and plan B, if you will, well before we actually start a project, just because we know we're going to need plan B.
When you mentioned in the conversation we had previously, you guys have deployed around $80 billion. That's $80 billion in the past 10 years or 10 to 15 years. So when you guys look at businesses outside of the rate of return, what do you look for when you're making that type of an investment in a company?
Well, first and foremost, it's really, you think this is crazy, but we don't start worrying about the money. It's not about the money. It's really about understanding if the company or the business or the product is actually solving a real problem or meeting needs in the world somehow. And understanding why it's meeting those needs and why is this particular company the one doing it. Why are they the ones? Why are they the right owner? Why are they advantaged? And why is the competition not doing it? And more importantly, what kind of value is that really creating for the customers? And what are the customers' alternatives? Why are they buying that? It must be creating value. So we start there, and if we like what we see and we like the team and we think we can grow it, and if it brings new capabilities to the company, then we'll start to worry about whether or not we're overpaying and how we can manage the risk and what kind of value we think we can create with it.
Do you have any flop stories that you're willing to share?
Flop stories?
Yeah.
I got a lot. How much time do we have? I mean, we have lots of case studies like that. Yeah, I tell you that probably the biggest one, it's turned out to be a great story, but for the first 10 years, it was a miserable experience where we acquired about 1/3 of the DuPont company back in 2002. And this was a business that invented Lycra, which is probably the greatest product of all time because it holds up underwear and socks, right? And baby diapers, among other things. And they invented polyester, a very important fiber. And they invented nylon, very important fiber. Nylon literally got Americans through World War II after it was invented, parachute yarn and things like that. But like all products, it eventually commoditized because the competition came to the market. They lost their advantages, so they decided they wanted to sell a global business that was a tightly intertwined part of DuPont, And we told them that we'd love to own that. What we didn't realize is it takes a lot of work to pull something out of another company that's so dispersed across the world and turn it into a really cohesive, well-organized business that has a different culture. I mean, that was the biggest thing. We missed the entire piece that Charles always used to think, but our culture is great. We have MBM, so they're just going to embrace it, right? And why aren't they embracing it? I'm like, Charles, it doesn't work that way. We have to earn it. And they have to learn to trust us. Our incentive compensation system, for example, is written on 2 words on a napkin. It says, trust us. And so that takes time to build that up. So that flopped for about 10 years. But through, again, and this is no different, we had a lot of entrepreneurs in our company dive in and fix it. And it took 10 years, and now it's literally one of our most profitable companies. But Charles still gives me an F on this because it was tough. We chewed up a lot of horsepower.
So going back to the idea of trust us, what are some of those attributes that you look for then in future entrepreneurs? Or what attributes do you think potential future entrepreneurs in this room need to have to reach that point?
Well, when we meet a lot of entrepreneurs because we're looking to constantly deploy our capital, and we treat a $500,000 investment really just as importantly as we would a $5 million or $50 million or larger, for lots of reasons. I mean, first off, the way on those smaller deals, those will end up being big deals someday. And when you're teaching your people, how to work on a smaller deal, it's no different than extra zeros being on the end. So we take those very, very seriously. And so there's 3 main things that we're looking for in entrepreneurs. The first one is the quality of their idea. What happens a lot is they'll come see us, or we'll go see them, and they'll immediately launch off into, here's what I want to go do. And they don't really have formed an opinion yet about why that's necessary to be done. What is the problem in society that's creating this opportunity? Why is the industry that you want to go attack with a new business model, why is it vulnerable? And how do you know if you're competitively advantaged or not? So really making sure that the entrepreneur understands whether or not they have a chance to be successful, and they have personal knowledge of it and not just instinct, is usually a really important quality. That they actually understand the problem they're trying to solve is really the starting point. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that they actually have a real business plan. And it can't just be, I got it up here. When you take things from up here through a pencil or a computer, and you get it into writing, you find out very quickly whether or not you really crystallized up here what you think you have when you were forced to write it down. And so actually looking at the narrative, what they're wanting to accomplish, whether or not it actually jives with what they're telling us. And then simple things like forward-looking business plans. Probably the biggest mistake an entrepreneur makes, and we make it in big business too, is how much time it's going to take to actually fulfill what you're trying to do. So if you think it's going to cost $3 million before you're profitable, just every single time we'll multiply that times 2 or 3. And so if the entrepreneur isn't being realistic about it, we're a lot of rose-colored glasses. We'd much rather hear somebody say, look, I think it's going to cost 3, it's really going to probably cost 6 or 9 or 12, but here's my contingency, and oh, by the way, you're part of the reason, you're part of that contingency. People are afraid to say that, but it's the truth, right? So just being intellectually honest about it and having a real business plan is probably the second most important thing. And then third is, whether or not they're going to be persistent or if they give up too easily, and what are their values, and do they really have integrity? Will they do the right thing when the going gets tough, because it's going to get tough? Would the entrepreneur be willing to take no paycheck for 2 years? Are they willing to give up their social life? These are things you have to do when you're starting a business, at least think about them. So the rewards can be great, and you can create a lot of great value in society, but if you don't have these qualities, we're typically looking somewhere else.
would you consider yourself to have been an entrepreneur when you were in college, to have maybe thought through any of those types of ideas or mindsets that you just talked about?
My biggest entrepreneurship activity in college was try to make the SE trike races more profitable. That was
They're fun event.
Yeah.
I did that one once. It's a pretty good time.
But I think we consumed all the profits, so it was probably a not really. You know, I wasn't. And, you know, I just wanted to get done, get out of school, and go start learning. That was probably my entrepreneurship, was to want to go learn. And, you know, I was blessed with being able to start at a couple places where I could go see lots of different clients in the accounting profession, and I learned a lot doing that, a lot. You know, what it didn't teach me, and that's not a criticism, it's just reality, is, you know, how do you actually make money? You know, why do businesses make money? And you know, that's kind of the education I started getting when I got to Koch.
Well, kind of on Koch, you know, I remember you mentioned that at the age of 39, you were named CFO of Koch. So how'd you feel when Charles made that call to you, and you know, what reflecting on that now, what's been the biggest lesson learned?
Well, I remember the conversation, and it was, it came as a big surprise to me and to them, because the CFO that they actually had been grooming left after he'd been in the role for 3 months. So they didn't have a plan B. Actually, we talked about making sure we got plan Bs and contingencies. They didn't have one. So they brought me in and they said, we're gonna make you the CFO. And I said, look, I'm not ready. And they said, we painfully aware of that. I'm like, wow, this is getting off to a great start on day one here. But, you know, they basically said, look, we know you're not, but you're gonna be the right guy, and we're gonna help you be successful. And I said, all right, let's go. So that was a pretty fun day.
Do you have any lessons that you can like look to and say, man, that was a pivotal moment, or just, you know, wow, that was no crap moment?
No, I think it's you know, all too often in businesses, but it's not just in business. It's in any institution. I mean, it could be your church, it could be your school. You know, the bureaucracy that can be built in is enormous. You know, and this happens because, you know, people are human, and, you know, humans do stupid things, and, you know, that turns into bureaucracy, and, you know, and oftentimes fear is what motivates people. And so you get in this big company, and if you're afraid of looking stupid, or you're afraid of failure, then you'll just start making stuff up in meetings, you know, that may or may not be true, right? And I mean, I've seen it all the time. I saw it at former employers. But at Koch, it's you know, we're all on the same team. We all work together. We all trust each other. You know, and I trust the people I work with, that if I'm not in the room, they're not going to be saying what they would say to me if I was in the room, and vice versa. I mean, there's absolutely no question about it. So just being honest and speaking your mind, and if you don't know the answer to something, just say you don't know. Now, if that's Charles you're saying that to, you better have an answer back in a couple hours. But, or as long as it takes to get the work done, you make it a priority. But if you don't know, it's okay. And having that kind of culture, and it really starts at the top with your leadership. You have to live your life that way and practice that in your work, so that the people down below you feel empowered to do the same thing. It's the permission they have to be honest, and you don't get that as much as I think we should.
So when you talk about trust, you know, how do you instill that into the culture in a 140,000 employee organization?
You just threaten the hell out of them. You know, it's a good question. You know, I remember when we acquired Georgia Pacific, it was December of 2005, and Charles immediately wanted to go down there and you know, start introducing them to our financial frameworks and our other frameworks on day 2. And it was like, Charles, I mean, the ink has not even dried yet. But you know, we had just written a very large check. It was a $21 billion deal, and I think fear was motivating him about this point in time, right? So we go down there, and we the folks in the, he's asking the folks in the room, you know, a simple question. And he asked them to raise their hand if they answer A, B, or C. And the right answer was C, but everybody got A and B. And we typically see this in a public company and the way they think about certain things. And it's the way Charles conducted himself. He just told him, he's like, look, the right answer is C. You know, we knew that you'd probably pick A or B, but it's okay. We're gonna help you. You know, and after we explained the answer, they're like, okay, I get it now. But it was an immediate, that second day, we're gonna help you be successful. You know, all of you are probably thinking, wow, now I'm gonna get a new owner, we're gonna get fired, they're gonna bring in their own people. And that wasn't what it was all about. So start at day one at the top, cascade it down, really important.
Now, since you took over as CFO, there's been, I mean, we talked about this a little bit in the previous conversation, just the growth that's actually happened within Koch. And you know, many people in the public say Charles is not an entrepreneur. You know, and what can you say if somebody said, hey, I don't think Koch Industries is an entrepreneurial company?
Well, a couple things about that. One, it's laughable when you hear folks in the media say that, you know, Charles inherited his wealth. I mean, Charles inherited a balance sheet that had 12 million of equity on it. I mean, that was it. That's a lot. But today that number is 7,500 times greater than that, right? So it's grown dramatically, and it's really all grown under his leadership. And you know, people also often ask me, what kind of decision making does he have to approve everything? I'm like, he actually, you know, on the strategies for the company, the tactics, the things that all the leadership chooses to work on, he provides no direction. None. I mean, I honestly, in 23 years CFO, have never been told what to do. Now, I'm very careful to make sure that they know what I am doing and what I am working on, so they have an opportunity to course correct with me. But when you're telling people what to do all the time, then you know they're not creative, they're not innovating, they're not owning their role, they're not owning their function, they're not owning their business. So that's been a key part of it. He's totally an entrepreneur. Now, he's also very, very disciplined. You know, I mean, he's unemotional. He's not strategic. He does things by the numbers. And so, you know, oftentimes you'll hear a public company say an announcement, we're acquiring this company because it's strategic. Or we did that because it was strategic. It's like, what's strategic about writing off $8 billion? You know, what often happens. And so they do it in the interest of some goal that is qualitative, but if you're not earning a return for your shareholders, you know, in our world, that can't be strategic. It's a bad strategy. So he's very, 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 very disciplined. At the same time, he's very entrepreneurial. And quite frankly, being an entrepreneur means you have to absorb risks. He's very willing to do that. Now, very calculated risks that won't blow up the company. And if, you know, but we will deploy many hundreds of millions or billions, and, you know, it doesn't all go well, but how he reacts to that is very important too. He doesn't wig out. He may do it behind a closed door with me and Dave Robertson, but he does not wig out with the rest of the company. They don't see that. Because if the company sees that, then they're not, and he's really not wigging out. He's just like, we can do better than this. But then the rest of the company will be afraid to take risk. And probably the biggest problem we have, and that you'll have as entrepreneurs, as your businesses grow, is getting your employees to adopt your risk profile. Very difficult to do. I mean, we're constantly having to get people to think bigger, not be afraid to take the risk, because there are no free lunches. If you want to grow a business and return, you're going to take risks.
So are you the one wigging out then?
Sometimes. Sometimes.
Well, reflecting back, you said you didn't feel as much like an entrepreneur when you were at Wichita State, but now, you know, you're in your career and CFO of Koch. Do you feel entrepreneurial now?
Totally. You know, there's two kind of roles that a CFO has, the way I like to think about it. One is very administrative, kind of ministerial, and you're reporting history. The other part of it is you're strategic, you're helping think about what the next 10 years is gonna look like versus reporting on last year. And that's, I mean, I have administrative stuff I have to do, but I don't enjoy it. I mean, I'd much rather work on, I've got great people that love doing some of that work. Like our controller and our tax person, our treasurer. I love working with them, but what I'd really rather do is think about the strategy and where we're gonna go grow. The other thing that, you know, I'm very passionate about, I think it's important for everybody to understand, the entrepreneurs especially, is, you know, it's like on the video, you know, where you go to Africa and people think capitalism, they think that entrepreneurship is evil somehow. You know, and even in this country, even coming out of business schools across America, all too often, students think that profit is bad. Is bad. The reality is profit is just a market signal telling you that you're creating value in society. And I love to use this example with students and even our own employees. We had a $600 million project at Georgia Pacific, and it was really to revamp our quilted northern toilet paper. You know, believe it or not, it could still be improved after hundreds of years of making it. You know, you'd be shocked at all of the attributes you care about. Soft, strong, no poke through. Gotta be absorbent. Totally. Oh yeah. Yes. But so we're doing it. It's a $600 million project, and we believe that we were going to make, I don't remember the numbers now, probably $100 million in cash flow a year. So we'd have a really good return. But when you get down to what the project was about, we'd come up with a new technology that converted how we made paper or the tissue so that it improved the quality, all while at the same time we used 20% less pulp, which is 20% less trees, 20% less pulp. It uses 20% less water in the process. You know, we're draining water out of Savannah River, many rivers, making paper. And because it's got less water in the production process, it has 20% less natural gas on the back end of the process to dry the paper. Because nobody likes to buy wet toilet paper, we learned that here. Right? It's got to be dry. So here's a production process where we can invest $600 million, and the company's being more profitable. And the profits come from 20% less consumption of resources, 20% less trees, 20% less water, 20% less natural gas. But students think that that's bad because it's more money. And it's crazy because when you think about anybody's P&L, the top line is driven by products and services that are creating value for somebody else, right? And your bottom line is driven by what it takes you to drive that revenue from a cost perspective. And if you can do it with less resources, then you're more profitable. And we should celebrate that, you know, and people that are willing to do that. Now, you end up with more profit, we call that more capital, and that's society's way of saying you're a good steward, go redeploy it into new products, new innovation, so that we get to enjoy all these great flat screen TVs and everything we enjoy as consumers now, right? And that's what's missed by, you know, terrorists that would go do something like that.
So talking about strategy and long-term, you know, 5, 10, even longer-term strategy, where does Wichita fit into that? And how has Wichita been beneficial in the growth of Code as a company in your position over the last several years?
Well, it's been very important for many reasons. One is we find, you know, some of the attitudes on the East and West Coast to be a little entitled. We find them sometimes to be just not hardworking, not willing to do what it takes, and that culture that exists in the Midwest of just hard work and earning it to exist more. So that's number one. Number two, what's happening now is with innovation and the revolution that's occurring, really driven by technology. What it really is, it's new software that is being enabled by computing power where the cost is nearly dropping to zero. Now, the cost isn't dropping to zero because last time I checked, Dell, IBM, these people want to get paid for when you buy a computer. But relative to the computing power, versus, just because of Moore's law, the costs are dropping every 18 months in half, all while the productivity, the output, is doubling every 18 months. And when you extend that, it's exponential. So there's really three big costs: the cost to compute, the cost to store, and the cost to move data. It's like Netflix coming over, the internet to your home. These costs are approaching zero on a relative basis. So if the technology component is almost free, then software, and this is why artificial intelligence and machine learning is becoming so big and so important, is because the computing power exists to advance these technologies. So the innovation is coming from applying software that's driven by this exponential reduction in cost and output, and marrying that up with equipment in a different way. And that can be done anywhere. It doesn't have to be done in Silicon Valley or Tel Aviv. It can be done in Wichita, Kansas. And given the fact that we have an infrastructure here where the commutes are 3 hours less than a lot of other big cities, but this city does not talk about that enough. It's a big issue, right? Think about the lost productivity next time you're in Los Angeles or New York. It's a disaster, right? We don't have that here. So if we get mad when we get stuck at a stoplight, at least I do. Right? No, but Wichita should be set up, and the Midwest should be set up to do great things because we've got the right culture, we've got the talent, and bringing together these new products and innovations, which are really a marriage of equipment and software in new ways, can be done anywhere.
So speaking of talent, specifically here in Wichita, if you follow top reports of the top talent leaving Wichita, specifically with women and minorities, what role can Koch play in keeping the top students coming out of university here, or the top entrepreneurs or the top talent here in Wichita? How can Koch play a role in keeping them here in Wichita?
Well, probably our biggest program, and it was really started by Richard Dinkle. I know Kim's here. But Richard was very focused at changing how we did college recruiting. And we used to do it the old-fashioned way. We would just go on campus, try to hire people, and sometimes that worked, sometimes it didn't. And now we aggressively interns to give students a chance to decide if they want to work at Koch, but also gives us a chance to spend time with these students. And so we do this at 36 different universities across the Midwest. Wichita State is either number 1 or 2. Each year we'll have 50 to 60 interns. And that's been a great program for us. It's helped us really keep talent, because when we identify it early and they're in college still, before they get a chance to get out of here, we try to hire them. I need your business card, by the way.
Hey, I have one. All right. I'll make sure you get it before we head out. So if you're bridging the gap between your industry, Koch, and the college campus, how then are you going to bridge it between those two and the community as a whole? The whole point of having Startup Grind U work with Startup Grind Wichita was to start to bridge that gap between university and community. So where does Koch fit in, even with the interns and all of those programs, into that mix?
That's a great question. We sometimes Koch's criticized for not doing enough in the city, to be honest with you. I think Koch does a lot, and it can't do everything because that defeats the purpose too. But the reality is we can do more. And I'm asked every now and then, why doesn't Koch do more? And I'll ask right back, why don't you ask? You're just complaining, right? What do you need? And so, when we get that kind of a request, obviously when they say, I need you to give me $5 million, that doesn't always work. Sometimes it does. But when it's where we can give people a hand up rather than a hand out, and that could be in the form of mentoring, or working with entrepreneurs. It's just a matter of giving us a call and plugging us into that infrastructure.
So then what would your best piece of advice for somebody if they wanted to kind of plug into that infrastructure? How would they do it?
Well, get a great education first and get good grades. That's job one. You got to focus on the task at hand. And then if you do want to start your own business, which I would encourage people to do, and there's not a better time to do it than when you're young. The hardest time to start a business is when you're married, you got kids, right? Because the cost of failure goes way up. And it's the opportunity cost on your family too, because it is time intensive to do it right. So do it while you're young. But to do that, because you truly don't know anything, and you only know less as you get older, but the problem is you think you know more.
That's called wisdom.
Yeah, it is. But you need to surround yourself with people that can help mentor you and help you, not do everything for you, but to help guide you through, the inevitable problems you're going to have starting up a business. So that'd be my advice.
Well, so many of us in this room were here back in November when we heard from Chase Koch and talked a lot about the future of Koch, the future of Wichita. So from your perspective, where's Koch going and where do you think Wichita can go? Well,
I don't know where Koch's going. In fact, Charles asked me that question on the plane today, like I'm supposed to have the answer. You're the CEO, not me. He really did. It was intimidating. I'll tell you what I do know. So, does anybody know the Rule 72 in here? Okay, what's Rule 72?
Rule 72 is the amount of interest divided by 72 gives you the number of years it takes your money to double.
Right. So that's great. I mean, it's usually, I don't even get it one hand in. That's great. And so, let's say a business is, by the way, a business should earn a 10 or 12% rate of return. It has to. And because you have, investors have alternatives, and they could go buy debt, that's going to pay them not big today, but over time, 7-8%. And obviously, if you're going to be the equity investor, the risk, only the risk in the business, you must earn a higher rate of return than that. It's just, and that's why over time, the stock market has earned over the last 100 years about a 10% rate of return. It's not an accident. It's the law of economics. It has to, or else entrepreneurs don't have the incentive to start up businesses, put the capital, et cetera. So at Koch, we have a policy of reinvesting 90% of the earnings. We have had that policy for 55 years. And if you start off with a $12 million capital base, and you're earning we've actually done better than a 10 or 11% return, called 13 or 14, and you do the math on that, you know that the capital is going to double every 5 years, right? If the Rule 72 tells you that. The reason it's not called the Rule of 100 is because it's the beauty of compounding, right? Where you earn interest on your interest. So the 7.2 years instead of 10 years, if you're earning 10%, is compounding. And when you compound, it becomes exponential. And over 55 years, since Charles has been there, if you're doubling every 5 years, that's 11 doubles, right? And if you start with 12 million and go double 11 times, you're going to find a big number. And so what I know is that that's probably going to continue, and unless we make some really poor decisions and we invest the capital poorly. But what that means is 5 or 6 years from now, rather than being at 130 billion in revenue like we are today, which should probably be around 260, our employee count's at 140,000. It's going to be probably north of 200, 250, and our equity base should have doubled. Now that won't happen radically or naturally. It's certainly not easy, and it won't be linear. It'll be choppy, and it'll happen when the opportunities and our capital and our people and capabilities can marry up. But that I do know, and that has big implications. It has implications for where are we going to get the people? Are we training them fast enough? Will it all be in Wichita? No, because you really need to source everything, and you can. Now, because of the internet, I mean, we can source our IT talent in Bangladesh. We can source it in Bangalore. We could source it here. And the truth is, it'll probably be all of the above. So making sure that we're thinking through what we're going to look like 5 years from now is really just what kind of capabilities, where they'll be. The kind of businesses that we're going to be in will change and evolve. Every business we own, every business that you're involved with here is under attack. It's natural. It's the state of things, right? That's how the world innovates and moves on. Our gasoline that we make probably won't be needed 20 years from now, or at some point. And the same is true for every single industry. So we're methodically thinking about how do we shift and enter these new businesses with these new tailwinds. And the one thing that has been consistent the last 6, 7 years, it's all been technology. We've invested about $17 billion in technology in the last 6, 7 years in businesses and capabilities, and we'll keep doing that.
So, reflecting on just your experience at Koch, and where you're at today, so you personally, what excites you? What gets you up in the morning to go to work every day?
That's a good question. You said what excites me now. I was going to say going to see this trainer I got, but then you said work. Let's see, and that is work actually. I honestly have not had a day that I didn't love going to work. And I'm very blessed, very lucky about that. And right now, it's doing a little bit of what Charles is doing. I spent a lot of time with other people trying to help them learn what I've learned the last 25 years and trying to be mentor to others. I spent a lot of time doing that. So having them think through some of the questions that I asked earlier about what is a good product, what is a good business, do we have the capabilities to be in this business? If we don't, can we build the capabilities? Can we acquire the capabilities? Well, how does all this fit together? And is it just a pipe dream, or is there a real financial case that goes with all of that? Helping people through that journey, you don't learn it in business school. You learn some of the concepts and the foundations, but you really learn it when you're in the real world, with real money and with real people, trying to bring people along with you on whatever that journey is. And so helping people with that and giving them feedback and being honest about it, which means we have to hire people that can handle feedback. The scariest day of my life was the first day I'd sit down with Charles and Dave Robertson, and they told me about all of my deficiencies. And I mean, it took a while, right? So, but you have to remember, feedback is a gift. And if you don't know what you're doing wrong, and typically, if you're doing it wrong and you know about it, you're not going to do it wrong. So it's where you don't realize you're doing it. It's the way you're coming across to other people. You got to get the feedback so that you can make the course corrections. And so I spent a lot of time doing that too. And I actually enjoy it. It sounds really evil. But if you're helping other people by helping them course correct, and if they appreciate that, it's a lot of fun.
Well, we're going to open up the questions here in a couple of minutes. Just a few questions before we do that. So when somebody says, what's your definition of success? What's your answer?
Helping other people. It really is. What a business exists to do, it's to help your customers and their own businesses. Charles likes to talk about the benevolence of the baker. And there's like a baker doesn't get up at 4 in the morning and start baking, necessarily because he enjoys it. He's doing it because he's creating value for his customers. And typically that is what he enjoys. And you've got to be in something you enjoy, or you really need to go find something else. But when you're doing that, you create value, that free exchange, that baked good for that currency, so that person can earn a living, is how value gets created in society, in that simple example. And it doesn't matter what business it is, how big or small, every transaction is built on that premise. So making sure that we're helping others understand that, making sure that we really are creating value for others, because we're not entitled to be in business tomorrow. I mean, Charles thinks it could all go away. It reminds us of that all the time, right? it's because we continue to create value for other people is why we're still in business. And if we continue to do that and focus on doing that in a world that's rapidly changing, the worst thing you can do is go get protectionist with your existing business and try to defend it. What you ought to be trying to do is destroy it every day, cannibalize every day. Because if you're not going to do it to yourself, your competition is going to get you. And it's just a matter of time. So we try to do that quite a bit, and working with the businesses to do that, it's hard. Nobody likes to try to destroy their status quo. But you have to keep chipping away at it.
So the last question before we open it up is, if you have someone sitting in front of you right now, you have about 200 plus people, what's the one advice you want them to walk away with tonight?
Well, it's to be principled, and everything with me and Koch, and of course I learned this from Koch, but it's really to start your day principled, integrity. In the end of the day, you can do a lot of great stuff, but if you're not doing integrity, it's not. You really didn't get it. You didn't live a fulfilling life. And so that's the first thing: is live a principled life, do it with integrity, be humble about it. The difference between arrogance and humility is the difference between failure and success. Humble people are the ones that are worried about things are going to, even though things might be going great, they know they won't in the future, and they know they can't predict the future. And so planning for that in whatever way is really the most important thing. So being adaptable, humble, and embracing change as a constant and a good thing, not a bad thing, that's really the most important advice I can give, because change is permanent. And it's just going to continue, and it's accelerating. The life cycle of a business or product is shortening, which is great. It's a good thing, because that means we continue to create great advancements in the products and the wealth that we get to enjoy. But you have to be adaptable. You have to be prepared for that, or else your business model will get crushed. It's just a matter of time.
Let's give Steve a round of applause. If you have a question, raise your hand and I will hustle over to you and give you the mic. So any questions, throw your hand up there and we'll get it over to you. Question to you, right?
Thank you. So companies like DuPont, they had a starting point, like gunpowder. But so do you look at buying companies that are already going, or are there people in Koch that are sitting around thinking of the next new product or idea? Or where do you get those?
Well, that's what Chase is doing. Chase is working with all those entrepreneurs, hopefully across the globe, that have the next great idea. And we want our brand to be that they want to find, they should want Koch to be their owner, and we can help them in a way that a venture capitalist can't. Now, if it's an entrepreneur who's not really interested in, maybe they're interested in creating value for their customers and really taking their idea to another level. But if what they're really interested in is trying to build it up really quickly and do a quick IPO and get rich, then they probably ought to go work for a venture capital firm, because that's the way their model works. The money turns over pretty quickly. For us, if it's something that where you need to nurture it over a very, very long period of time, and you realize there's going to be zigs and zags and things will not work out like you think they will, to have somebody who can help you navigate that. And we figure out how to work with an entrepreneur in a private system where they can make the kind of money that they deserve to make off their idea. So we have to figure out how to do that differently versus the typical model. So yeah, that's what we're trying to do with Chase. We're also looking for big opportunities too. Unfortunately, when the Federal Reserve and most central banks around the world are running the greatest Ponzi scheme of all time, right? Print money and driving down interest rates so low, it's driven up the value of things where we just going to be patient. And so it's a high-class problem we have. But you couldn't do that unless you worked for a private company like way Charles wants to run Koch.
Question in the front.
Thank you. So I want to preface this question with my thoughts. As a gentleman who leads a group of people in a business and hiring folks, we try to express our drive for what we do and share that with them so they carry the same mentality. And you mentioned when you guys acquired Georgia Pacific that you had to, that was a risk of figuring out how to do that, and you had a question for a group of people. I'm really curious what that question was. And maybe you can't share that.
ABC.
Yeah, I have to remember it now. I'll see you after this, and then I'll reconstruct it for you. It was a basic math question, is what it was, and I'm afraid I won't get it right, so I don't want to.
Give the controller did that.
Yeah.
Question in the front.
So what's your risk management matrix look like?
Well, we expect every one of our leaders to manage risk.
They have a matrix that they basically go through each one of them.
Yeah, well, it's formal and informal. We expect our leaders to not just fly off with a business plan and not really think about the risk and to own their own risks and to manage them. We do have a separate risk department that has folks who are independent that kind of watch over that. Because sometimes, even though we try to hire the right people with the right principles, right values, sometimes it doesn't always work out that way. And sometimes in businesses where, for example, we have a lot of trading, where we're trying to create value through moving commodities from one part of the world to another, where they're most needed. The dollars are huge doing that. You know, you're moving a 16 million barrel tanker of crude oil, you know, times $60 a barrel. That's a $100 million cargo. And so, believe it or not, every now and then, somebody might enter a transaction, they enter it as a debit instead of a credit. Right? So all of a sudden you think you got a $100 million asset, you got 100, and you've actually shorted the position rather than going long. Right? Now we have controls against that, but every now and then when something like that happens, the trader will actually try to dig themselves out of that position. So you have risk people, you know, that manage those things. And actually that analogy I just gave you, that's never happened to Koch, but it's happened at other places. So we watch those things pretty carefully.
Question in the back.
There's Simon Sinek has a book out that says, "What is your why?" And it's been very popular. So what is Koch why?
Our why is to really create value using the economic means rather than through the political means. And the best example I can give you is, well, I can give you lots of examples, but the one that's kind of topical now is observing what Amazon did with New York City. And it's super topical. You know, I think it's absurd that a business would go ask, by the way, with the largest market cap in the world, would go ask for a subsidy from a state and local government. And the problem is, right now, every state, local, and city is so competitive that they feel like they have to do it. And so Amazon exploited that, especially with the process they ran all year, all throughout the country. When we built our new building out on 37th Street about, how long ago was that now? 4 years ago, 5 years ago. The city asked us when we were going to apply for industrial revenue bonds. And we said, we're not. They said, we don't even know how to work with you. They didn't. I'm not kidding you. They were confused. And I said, look, here's what we need to know. You know, we're going to make this investment. And it's a $100 million investment. Now, only 40 of that was on the building. 60 of that went to changing the infrastructure, putting up more security, right? Helping to move the road, paying for all that. And 40 million of that was for the building. Now the problem is that the day we got done spending that 100 million, what is it really worth? Well, commercial real estate on a per square foot basis cost that out at like $13 million. Why would we spend 100 million on something that's only worth 13 million? Because we needed the space, but the reality is, nobody would come in and pay that. Just can't. So what we told the city was, we just trust that you're gonna assess us properly. And they largely did. And our taxes went up, quite a bit. We were fine with that. We could have got a 10-year exemption, 10-year beta, and not paid sales tax and all other things. So it's the cronyism that is rampant. Everybody wants a handout. How about just a level playing field? And the good businesses will thrive, and the bad ones won't. That's what will create the most value in society for all of us. Through our pension plans, the ownership in companies, through the tax base, through the taxes we have to pay. That's what's going to create the most value. So it's tricky. It's tricky because every city feels like they have to do it. Every community feels like they have to do it. So how do you achieve the best municipality without offering those types of subsidies? Literally creating subsidies that the government entity that's providing them doesn't really know enough about the industry anyway. And 9 times out of 10, they go bad. I'll give you an example. There's a study, every single stadium built in this country where the government has paid for it, haven't even come close to meeting the economic projections for the city that justify that investment. So let private dollars do it. I mean, Jerry Jones, and all these NFL owners, they got the capital. So we're very focused on just doing it the right way and creating value for others, have a level playing field. If we do a good job, we're going to get compensated for it, we're going to return, but not asking for a bunch of protection at the expense oftentimes of those that can least afford to do it. It comes through sales tax or something, and which most impacts the poor.
The last question we ask most of our speakers that take the stage is, what can we as a Wichita community do to help you?
That's a good question. I think just be supportive of Coke. When I started there 25 years ago, admittedly it was we were not doing near enough to help the community understand what it was all about. That's partly why I'm here, so that people get a feel for who Coke is, and because it's a tremendous asset in the community. The tax base that it creates is huge. The salaries that it pays are very fair, but significant, right? And it gets bashed a little bit too much because, people just assume this or that. And some of that this or that might have been, I'm not gonna say it was ever deserved, but we created a little bit on our own because we weren't as transparent about who we were, what we're trying to do. And it was just kind of like Darth Vader over there with his 4 walls. So that's changed a lot. And we got to do more to make sure that people understand who we are, because it's a good story, but it's good for the community. But if you see people just bashing, just ask them how they know that to be true. And then when they give you a dumb answer, then ask them again, how do you really know that to be true? They don't really know. They just want to whine. Probably not a very good answer, but that's the answer you get.
Let's give Steve one more round of applause.